Okay, so what I'm going to be doing, there'll be 3 videos in total, and I'm going to be going through the working out for each of the questions in our economic growth short answer and multiple choice question booklets. Now, don't kill me, they're not in order. Kind of done them in the order that we've been doing them in class, so yeah, you'll just have to flick through and find the question that I'm up to, so bear with me. Okay, so we have done this one in class, but I am just going to do them all anyway. All right, so this one shows data for an economy, and what they want you to do is to figure out what has happened to the consumer price index. Okay, so what we know is that consumer price index it measures inflation. All right, that's what CPI does. It measures inflation, and we also know that real GDP is nominal GDP adjusted for inflation. Okay, so what we can figure out is that the difference between these two is going to be inflation, and in this case CPI. So the first thing we need to do is work out what CPI is, like what the CPI is, and then we can decide what it's done and get the right answer. Okay, so in 2013 we can have a look. CPI would just be 100. Okay, there's no difference between nominal GDP and real GDP. So CPI is 100. I'm just going to add it up the top here. Okay, but what about in 2014? Okay, we can see there's been a change. In 2014, CPI, and how we work that out is basically the difference between nominal GDP and real GDP. Remember I said before that real GDP is adjusted for inflation. So what we can do is go 105 divided by 103 to get 102. Okay, so our CPI in 2014 is 102. And so what we can see now is that it has risen. It's gone from 100 to 102. So it's risen by 2%. Okay, so immediately, if we're looking at our answers, we can scratch A and scratch B, okay, and just have a look at these two. Let's have a look at nominal GDP now. We also know it has changed. It's gone from 100 to 105, and it's risen by 5%, okay? So we now know that the answer is going to be C, okay? CPI has risen by less than the change in nominal GDP. So true, it has risen. It's gone from 100 to 102, it's risen by 2%, but 2% is less than 5%, which is what nominal GDP has risen by. So we can say that the answer is C. CPI has risen by less than the change in nominal GDP. All right, cool, C. All right, let's have a look at this one. Now we know from looking at this that this is going to be a multiply question, because they're wanting to find out an initial injection or increase in exports, how many times it's gone through the economy, what did it end up lifting national income by? Okay, so we know it's a multiply question. So first step in a multiply question, if we're not told it, we need to work out what MPC is. Okay, so that's step 1. So first thing we need to do is figure out what the change in consumption is over the change in national income, and that allows us to work out MPC. So change in consumption we can see is 40. That's simply 280 minus 240, just the difference. That's the change. The change is 40. Okay, same for national income. Change is 50. 370 minus 320 is 50. Okay, so if we figure that out, 40 divided by 50, we get 0.8. So our MPC is 0.8. Therefore, our MPS is 0.2, because remember, MPC plus MPS equals 1. All right, so if MPC is 0.8, MPS has to be 0.2. So now that we do that, we can find out what the multiplier is. We can solve for K. Okay, so to find K, we need to do 1 divided by the MPS. So 1 divided by 0.2 equals 5. We now have K. We now know that our multiplier is 5. Right, that brings us to step 3. Okay, so we can substitute it all into the formula. Change in aggregate demand times by K equals the change in national income to figure out what it is. So let's put in the stuff that we know. We know that national income in year 3 is changed by $100 million, and we know that the multiplier is 5, or K is 5. So all we need to do now to solve and find out what the change in aggregate demand is simply do 100 divided by 5, which equals 20. So 100 divided by 5 equals 20. Okay, so if we just pop it back in and check it, 20 times 5 equals 100 million. So our answer is, A, 20 million. All right, what happened here? Let's just get all this out here, don't we? And then I'll go through it. Okay, so this is a bit of a tricky question, this one actually. There's a bit to do in it for a multiple choice, okay? But what it's asking is the table shows national accounts for consumption and national income for an economy. What is the new equilibrium level of income in year 3 if investment increases by 40 billion? All right, so again, we know it's a multiplier question. So first thing, step 1 is find the MPC, okay? So it's the change in consumption over the change in national income. So 200 minus 110 is 90, so that's our change in consumption. And Y, national income, 300 minus 150 is 150, right? So that's our change in national income. So 90 divided by 150 gives us 0.6. So our MPC is 0.6, therefore MPS is 0.4, okay? So step 2, find the multiplier. All right, so we can punch that one in pretty quickly. 1 over MPS, which is 0.4, gives us 2.5. Okay, so now we know our multiplier. K is 2.5. So step 3 is substituting it into the formula. What I'm going to do is work out, firstly, what the change was in year 2. Okay, so this is year 2, all right? So we know that it's 300. National income is 300, so I can pop that in. We know that our multiplier is 2.5, so we're just solving to find AD. So 300 divided by 2.5 equals 120. All right, so this is what happened in year 2, okay? The change was 120 times by 2.5 equals 300. All right, so in year 3, though, we know that there's been an increase in investment by 40 billion, okay? So the change is increased by $40 billion. All right, so what I'm going to do here is, year 3, the change in AD is 120, which was the change in year 2, remember? Plus 40 equals 160. So our new change in aggregate demand is 160. All right, and if I substitute that into our formula, change of 160 times 2.5 gives us our answer of 400, that should be $billion, okay? So this is a really quite an involved multiple choice question. I don't like this one at all. All right, let's move to the next one. Okay, so this the diagram shows the aggregate demand and aggregate supply curves for an economy. Other things being equal, which of the following will shift the aggregate supply curve from AS to AS1? Right, so we know that aggregate supply represents the ability of an economy to deliver goods and services to meet demand. We also know that certain things shift the supply curve, and this is wage rates, price of other inputs, technology, and available supplies of capital and labour. Okay, so if we're having a look here, the only answer that I can see that would lead to a shift in the supply curve is the reduced skilled migrant intake, okay? So if we're not bringing in skilled migrants, on 457 visas. Okay, there's less workers to produce output. Okay, so therefore real GDP moves. Okay, so we've got blue, which is the original, and red. So real GDP will decrease, and also the price level goes up as well. Okay, so there's not available supplies of labour, as we can see here. We don't have as many workers, and that's why there has been a shift to the left of the supply curve.